Let's call it evil. Where does evil come from?
Religion. And to answer your next question, morality comes from humanism and is stolen by religion for its own purposes.
Humanism according to who? Hitler, Mussolini, Stalin, who?
You're saying that Hitler was a humanist?
Just Hitchens.
I've lived to hear it said.
Hitchens.
In Virginia. Hitler was a Catholic.
Hitler was a Catholic,
so was Mussolini.
Give me a... How does morality exist if it's just my opinion against your opinion and there's no standard beyond?
Both of them had an official political concordat with the Protestant and Catholic churches. Both of them wanted the worship of themselves as well as of God.
So I suppose no evil comes from atheism.
And their third main ally, Hirohito, the Emperor of Japan, not content just to be theocratic, was himself a god. So anyone who says that fascism and Nazism was secular is an ignoramus.
Why is it wrong?
On a gigantic scale.
All right.
There seems to be a dread underlying all of this, a dread about the genitalia, a horror of women, a horror of their monthly effusions, a disgust, as I say, for their vaginas, that I don't find healthy. But that seems to me, in two senses, man-made. One, mammal-made, and two, made so that men can subordinate women, which seems to be a consistent finding in all religions. You will know that the pious Jew has to begin every day saying, God is to be thanked for not making me a woman or a Gentile. That's not moral preaching. No one goes around talking nonsense like that unless they think they have divine permission for it. Religion is therefore, yes, a poison.
You mentioned earlier, imagine if Jesus Christ had been proven to no longer be God or God's son. Imagine, if you will, a future where science is accepted as a total dogma of thought and reason is the ultimate arbiter. In that world, would humanity not find its own ways to tribalize again and have its own strife? There's the TV show South Park has a funny episode about this where they actually say in the future they fight over science as opposed to fighting over God. And for you, Mr. D'Souza, in the same way, in a world without God, is it really so unimaginable? I mean, is there a possible way? Could you imagine a future without it in the sense of humanity still being humans? And I'd also be remiss to say, in the great tradition of these debates, is it possible that you gentlemen might be able to go to a pub after this and continue over beers? I'd be happy to buy.
On the second point,
I think
it's as certain as anything can be that I'll be in a bar an hour. And Dinesh quite often, Dinesh and his wife have often joined me there. On your point, my view of the mammalian evolution of our species is that we are programmed to be superstitious. Religion is unvanquishable, unbanishable, as long as we're partly rational, as long as our prefrontal lobes are too small, our adrenaline glands are too large, and our opposing thumbs are still too clumsy. Of course, people can be sold every kind of delusion. I half agree with G.K. Chesterton when he said that people don't believe in God. They don't believe in nothing but in anything. I believe that the belief in God is a willingness to believe in anything. But if you take Orthodox religion away, you may very well find someone worshipping a pet rock, or a tame fish, or a crystal, or some New Age nonsense healing process. Yeah, that's the way a lot of people are. I just would like to say that there's a solid minority of us who are not impressed by any of this. And we're citizens too. And deserve that much respect. The last Pope, just in the last decade of his tenure, apologized. He said, we were wrong about the Jewish question. We probably shouldn't have said for so long the Jews were responsible for the murder of Christ. We were probably wrong in forced conversion of the peoples of the Indies, as they were thought of, the Isthmus and the southern cone of our hemisphere. We were certainly wrong. We owe an apology to the Muslims for the atrocities of the Crusades. We owe an apology to the Eastern Orthodox churches for the incredible butchery to which they, our fellow Christians, were subjected by us, the Roman Catholic Church. And we probably owe an apology to the Protestants for saying so many awful things about them and torturing and burning and killing them too. So having now said we were completely wrong and completely cruel and completely sadistic and completely violent and retarded human civilization for that many centuries in that many countries and continents, we're quit. and now we can go back to being infallible all over again. There are people who, on faith, will accept being spoken to in that tone of voice and in that way. But I, ladies and gentlemen, am not one of them. And I don't think there's any form of persuasion that should allow you to be spoken to as if you were serfs or slaves either.
The argument for theism, that not only can we establish this prime mover's existence, but we can show by some form of induction that he intervenes in wars, that he answers prayers, that he cares who we sleep with and in what position, what food we eat and on what days, is a ridiculous proposition. It's a claim to a truth that no primate can claim to make. Primates who claim to know it should be distrusted. Great damage has been done and continues to be done by such people and by such ideas. You're better off thinking for yourself and taking all the risks, and I might add, all the pleasures that will come from that. The most overrated of the virtues is faith. The metaphysical claims of religion are untrue. Thank you.
I've long said that the presumption is that the unborn entity has a right on its side, and that every effort should be made to see if it can be preserved. And I think that's an ethical imperative. What I do say in the book is I think the Roman Catholic Church makes this argument immoral when it could be a moral one by saying that contraception is not to be allowed, by saying that contraception is the moral equivalent of abortion. In other words, to say that contraception is also murder, which is a nonsensical and disproportionate position. I quote some serious Catholics in my book. William F. Buckley, the late, is one. Clare Booth Luce is another, by saying, if the church says that contraception and abortion are morally the same, it degrades the opposition to abortion. Why? And by making absurd arguments, as it has in the past, Aquinas believed that every single sperm contained a microembryo inside it, and thus that, if you like, I hope I don't offend anyone, hand jobs are genocide. As for blowjobs, don't start. That an ectopic pregnancy, in other words, a direct threat to the life of the mother, a fallopian tube pregnancy, is, instead of a direct threat to the life of the mother and an obvious no-starter for a human embryo, because that's going anyway, is someone who should be allowed to vote. This is nonsense. It's casuistry, it's immoral, it's superstition, and it prevents people from thinking seriously about matters that humanism can decide for itself, for heaven's sake, without any supernatural intervention.
My views are, if I say it for myself, tolerably well advertised. And if they're not, it's partly your fault. Because what I say is fairly intelligible, very plainly stated. You know what I think, if you care to find out. When I debate with Jews and Muslims and Christians, I very often find, I say, well, do you really believe there was a virgin birth? Do you really believe in a Genesis creation? Do you really believe in bodily resurrection? And I get a sort of Monty Python reply. Well, there's a little bit of metaphorical, really. You hear it very often said by people of a vague faith that, well, it may not be the case that religion is metaphysically true. Its figures and its stories may be legendary or dwell on the edge of myth, prehistoric. Its truth claims may be laughable. But allow for all that. You still have to credit religion with being the source of ethics and morals. Where would we get these from if it weren't for faith? I don't believe that it's true that religion is moral or ethical. I certainly don't believe, of course, that any of its explanations about the origin of our species or the cosmos or its ultimate destiny are true either. In fact, I think most of these have been conclusively, utterly discredited. But I'll deal with the remaining claim. Is it moral? Again, I can only do Christianity this evening. Is it moral to believe that your sins, yours and mine, ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters, can be forgiven by the punishment of another person? Is it ethical to believe that? Do you not in fact hear it said repeatedly about religion and by the religious themselves that, well, it may not be really true, the stories may be fairy tales, the history may be dubious, but it provides consolation? Can anyone hear themselves saying this or have it said of them without some kind of embarrassment, without the concession that thinking here is directly wishful, that yes, it would be nice if you could throw your sins and your responsibilities on someone else and have them dissolved, but it's not true.